I felt like the mandatory stuff did not prepare me well for what I do on a practical level. We do not read an actual contract. You do not draft a contract. You don't negotiate a contract. You don't look at a contract in a class about contracts. One thing I would add to law school, because I think this is a big gap for why some people are not prepared to practice.
Don't know what I'd ever do without you from the beginning to the end. You've always been here right beside me, so I'll call you my best friend.
Hey y'all, welcome back. Today I am going to be talking about law school, something that I haven't talked about in a long time because I graduated forever ago. So I just feel like, why am I still talking about law school? But we get comments that relate to law school, so that's kind of why I'm talking about it. So we get a version of this comment every so often, and it's always phrased differently, but the underlying message is the same. It's always kind of a version of, if I hate law school, am I gonna hate practicing? Or did law school prepare you to really practice? I'm reading all these cases, I'm doing all this stuff, I hate it, I'm miserable. Does this mean I'm gonna hate practicing? Where we're really getting at, how does law school compare to really practicing in real life? And I'm gonna describe my practice, I'm gonna describe law school, and y'all can be the judge, because I think they can be kind of different, but maybe that's just my experience, I don't know. But if you're someone who doesn't like to read a lot, doesn't like to do all this legal research and all the stuff that they make you do in law school, and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna be like, this is not the path for me, I don't think that's necessarily true, but I'll get into why. So to really understand my perspective, it's helpful to understand my practice. So I am a transactional attorney. I've done it on the capital market side, I've done it for M&A, I've done it for venture capital. I'm doing it for media and entertainment, but at the end of the day, I'm a transactional attorney. So that means I am reading contracts, interpreting contracts, drafting contracts, negotiating contracts. Contracts or agreements or whatever you want to call it, that is the bread and butter of being a transactional attorney. And it's just about what different types of contracts that you are dealing with on a day-to-day basis. What kind of people are you dealing with on a day-to-day basis? Giving different advice. It might be how to comply with the contract. It might be how to draft a contract that protects you, that gives you the most rights to do what you want to do. Whatever it is, we are transactional because at the end of the day, there's some kind of exchange of money going on. There's some kind of money crossing hands. Maybe you're hiring somebody to do something, going into a joint venture. It could be you're getting a loan. And what are the rules governing the money changing hands? That's like the best way I can really put it. When you're a litigator, you're doing something different. You're in court, you are writing briefs, you're doing legal research, all that type of stuff. And that is what I think law school prepares you better for than it does for what I do. So let me describe to y'all what law school is like. So your first year of law school, you have these mandatory classes that everyone has to take. You are not choosing your schedule your first year of law school, except for one class your second year. So we got to choose one elective our second semester. I think there were like 4 or 5 options. We got to choose one. But besides that, we are taking what they tell us we have to take. That is contracts, civil procedure, torts, constitutional law, property. I feel like I'm forgetting something. Criminal law. And then we have to take a legal writing course. There might have been one more that I left out, but there are those are like the basic classes that everyone has to take. And then you get to choose your elective and everyone has to do legal writing. You might be like, I'm a little confused. You said y'all have to take contracts and you say you deal with contracts every single day at work. Like, how did that not prepare you to be a contract attorney, which is what you are? Y'all, whole semester of contracts goes by. Whole semester. We do not read an actual contract. You do not draft a contract. You don't negotiate a contract. You don't look at a contract in a class about contracts. Like, it doesn't make sense. So in their contracts class, you're learning more about why contracts exist and what's the theory behind contracts. Like, at what point is a contract made? If we shake hands, does that mean we signed a contract? Was there a meeting of the minds? Did we both agree on the terms? You're learning a lot about like the philosophical reasons why we have contracts, the philosophical reasons behind at what point we say you even agreed to a contract. Are you old enough to enter into a contract? Do you have the mental ability to enter into a contract? That's what you're learning in contracts. And that's very different than the how to draft a contract, how to counsel a client in a contract. It's different than the why are we doing this. In the contract The contract class really focuses on the why, and that's not to say it's not helpful. So in contracts, you learn certain things that help you when you do get to the point where you're reading a contract, which is for me when I started working. That's the first time I really like read a contract for real. When you get to that point, you get a better understanding of all that boilerplate language at the end of a contract. You're like, oh, this stuff is important, and now you know why, because we know the why. They emphasize that in law school, so you know all the whys. So when you get to the point where you're drafting a contract, it helps you understand why you have to be so particular about language. It helps you understand some of the clauses. So like, for example, there's always a point in a contract where you're like, this contract is fully integrated and everything you need to understand the contract is right here on the page. You never went to law school, you might pick up a contract and be like, we could delete that. Like, what's that? If you went to law school, you will know the importance of that, of that provision, because you're like, oh, we learned that whole thing about people trying to bring in all this extra stuff to prove what the contract means in court, and we know all the law behind it. We know the headache that can be in the courtroom, because law school focuses so much on like courtroom and court stuff, that we understand, no, you actually need that. So I'm not saying that I would be as effective if I didn't go to law school. Like, definitely not. Like, you wouldn't be as effective at drafting a contract and all that, negotiating a contract, if you didn't go to law school. Like, you still need to go to law school to do this, but you are learning exactly how to do it on the job. Like, the how is just missing in law school when it comes to what I do. That goes for the other mandatory classes as well. Civil procedure, for example. I'm not really dealing with civil procedure on a day-to-day basis, because I'm not focused on like, where do I file this lawsuit, because I don't really deal with lawsuits. But I understand, because of civil procedure, I understand why we have that part of a contract where you're like, hey, the governing law, the choice of law is New York, it's California, it's whatever. Because choice of law is a headache. It's all these rules you have to piece together. It's so unpredictable. I can understand why in the contract people are like, we're gonna skip that whole thing and we're gonna say what the governing law is. Every so often when those certain clauses become like a negotiating point, you understand like how to really argue for it, because you understand the real world implications. All that said though, we don't actually sit down and draft a governing law provision. Does that make sense? It's just very odd how it's set up. It's set up all with theory, and I'm not opposed to how it's set up, like how law school is set up in terms of like the classes that they make mandatory, because I do think if you're a lawyer, no matter what you do, it's important to understand the Constitution. Like, I think it's important to understand con law. I think it's important to understand, okay, maybe I should know like how torts works, because torts are like when one person wrongs another, all the laws around that, so like assault and things like that. I think if you're an attorney, you should know the basics of that. But I think you can't only gear the mandatory stuff towards one kind of practice. Like, it's a new day. There are so many different types of lawyers now. Most lawyers, like I always say, do not actually go to trial. Most lawyers don't actually like go down that whole path. Today, there are all these different types of lawyers. So why don't you prepare everyone for like a basic understanding of how to do everything? Like, that's my perspective on that. So your first year, like I said, how they're giving you all these mandatory classes. After that, you get to do whatever you want. You pick whatever classes you want as long as you hit the number of credits that's required. And after your first year, after you do all the mandatory classes, the legal writing stuff, the only thing they require from you after that, besides hitting the number of credits, is to do legal research and another legal writing requirement. But you can just choose your own adventure. And I'm like, what y'all are basically telling us is like, these are the things that are most important, because we're not even gonna let you graduate if you don't take these classes. Then everything else, you kind of just choose. And I'm like, well, if y'all gonna tell me this is the most important stuff, why isn't anything geared towards other ways of practicing law besides like this very in the box perspective? Even with legal writing, I felt like our legal writing class was very focused on writing briefs, writing memos. We had to do an oral argument. I thought that was pretty cool. I thought it was fun, but we didn't do anything like, how do you summarize an agreement? When you're writing your answers to the test in law school, like they have this certain method you're supposed to follow, IRAC, CREAC, whatever. I think that method is super helpful. I use it till this day. Start with the conclusion, get to the point first, and then explain it. I think it's helpful, but I didn't do it in the context of transactional stuff until I got to work. In legal writing, they were never like, pretend like you are summarizing a contract for a client and giving them advice to do X. Like, that is a part of what I do, and like, why didn't I do that in a legal writing class? You know, like emails that lawyers write are not just your regular emails. They're sometimes long. You have a whole title at the top that says privileged and confidential. Like, they're very like long legal advice summaries. Transactional attorneys will also put out legal alerts. So what that is like if a new regulation drops, or sometimes if a new case drops, or whatever it might be, they will summarize that for their clients, like what that means for your transactions going forward. You should consider this, you consider that. Why don't we write legal alerts in legal writing? Like, y'all only want to focus on briefs in court. Like, there's other ways to practice. So yeah, I don't think that law school prepared me well for that either. But I think that my other classes that I chose to take later on did a much better job of that, because I was very intentional about the classes I chose my 2L and 3L year. So I took accounting for lawyers, I took tax, I took M&A, I took corporations, I took negotiations. I did a public interest entrepreneurship externship where we were helping entrepreneurs basically and like giving them legal advice. That was helpful for like the client counsel part of everything, and that's where I learned a lot about presentations and how to give a good presentation. That's another thing that you do. I think as a lawyer, period, if you have a client, like you're going to present on some aspect of the law, it would have been great to, you know, have some kind of aspect of that was mandatory, but it wasn't. I also designed my law school. I would keep 1L the same, how they have their mandatory classes. Like, I don't think anything's wrong with those mandatory classes, but I would just have a more practical aspect to contracts class for transactional attorneys. I would still have that legal writing class that's required 1L, but I would add some different kinds of legal writing. Like, it wouldn't just be briefs, memos, legal research. It'll also be legal alerts, client summaries, client emails, legal counsel, stuff like that. And one thing I would add to law school, because I think this is a big gap for why some people are not prepared to practice, is I would have a class that's mandatory and it's about the legal industry. Like, at the end of the day, the law is an industry. Like, people are going to law school, they're becoming lawyers, and then you provide services to a client. Like, you're getting paid for services. Like, it's essentially a business at the end of the day. So why aren't y'all teaching us the business aspect of it? Like, why do some people charge a retainer versus charging for a percentage of the earnings versus charging a billing rate? Like, how does that all work? What is it like to like be an in-house lawyer versus at a law firm? Because when you're in-house, you only have one client. That client is your employer. Like, how does that work versus like having a book of business? Like, it's almost like they're training us to be employees and like training out employees, but everyone's not going to be an employee. Some people are going to open up their own firm. Like, how do you open up your own firm? Why do firms choose to be LLPs? If you're day one, you know that we used to call this channel Angel and Sam LLP because it was a play on like the whole law firm thing. But we never really had a class that really broke down why do all these law firms structure themselves that way. It came up in corporations, but like I said, that was not a mandatory class. I think that is another big missing piece in law school, and maybe why some people think like, oh, I don't like law school, I'm not gonna like the real world. It's like they don't really talk about the law as an industry, the law as a business. They just talk about the law as a academic route, when only a very small portion of people who go to law school are going into academia. Most of us are going into practice. So how do you practice? How do people make money from practice? Like, how does it work on the practical side? Like, the practicality in law school is really, really missing. And you have to go search for like clinics and clerkships and externships and internships and summer opportunities in order to get that practical aspect, because it's really not a part of the mandatory curriculum. All I have to say is, like, do I think law school prepared me for legal practice? Yes, but it's very different than the real world. Like, it's very different from practicing. Sometimes I have to explain theory to people, but not that often. For example, last week I did have to explain contract theory to a paralegal because they were trying to understand something about an amendment, and they're trying to understand like the language or something like that. I was telling them the language in the contract has to be consistent, because if there's any consistency or whatever, like I was explaining the rules of interpretation, but that's very rare. Like, it's very rare that you have to explain that to somebody. Like, that's just something that lawyers kind of know. But in reality, you're actually drafting, you're actually negotiating, you're actually like doing document reviews, all this type of stuff. Like, what are the important clauses and all that type of stuff. Even my negotiations class, it was a very hands-on class, but it was also very different than negotiating in real life. We were doing a lot of our negotiations in my negotiations class face to face, and that's not really that common when you practice for real. A lot of negotiations happen over email, or like you just send drafts back and forth. Let me do a real world example. I'm representing an actor, and on the other side they're representing the production company. They're gonna send me a draft agreement. It's gonna be, all the terms in that agreement are gonna be beneficial to a production company, because their lawyers are going to try to aim high. They're going to try to make it as extreme as possible. And then now it positions me to like send them back a red line that's super duper detailed, and the red line is just like the track changes, And now I made the agreement super duper friendly to the artist. You go back and forth, and then slowly, by the time you get to the end, the agreement is kind of balanced. That's how negotiations for lawyers works in real life. But you wouldn't know that based on how it was posed to me in law school, like my negotiations class. It was more like we were talking back and forth. Like, it was fun. It was like, you know, we did a lot of like demonstrations and stuff. But that's not how it happens in practice. We live in a digital world now. Like, a lot of the negotiations happen over email, in the contract, in the comment bubbles. And then if you really, really, really can't get to a conclusion, you might hop on a Zoom call and like figure it out. But it's not like it seems on TV. It's not how it seems in law school. And sometimes I'm like, is it because a lot of the academics who are teaching us the law, a lot of them don't practice. A lot of them have never practiced. So I'm like, they need to bring in more practicing attorneys. The exception to that was my legal writing professor. He was actually a trial lawyer. But everyone else is kind of like, sometimes I'm like, do y'all realize how this stuff happens in real life? Like, maybe that's the disconnect. And that's what kind of, I mean, like, the theories I learned about negotiation and the books we read about negotiations are helpful. Like, it helps me understand why people will send that first draft and make it so extreme, because the person who throws the first punch, I guess in a sense, it makes it the most extreme, you're more likely to have the end result like favor your client. There's like all these theories to negotiating and stuff. So I understand the theory is great and it helps me understand why people negotiate the way they do, but I didn't learn how to negotiate in the same way that it actually happens in real life. Hopefully that makes sense. If you hate law school, I think my advice to you would be like, why do you hate law school? And what do you want to do? Why did you go to law school? What do you want to practice? Because if you hate legal research, you hate the opinions, you hate having to read all these cases, and you come to me and you're like, my dream is to be a criminal defense attorney, I'm gonna be like, okay, it might be a sign that might be a sign that that's not the route that you would enjoy. Or it could be maybe you hate legal research and legal writing and all the stuff you're doing in law school because the subject matter doesn't feel important to you. And I might be like, okay, before you try to switch gears, take a criminal defense class if they offer that. Maybe it's not the actions, maybe it's just like law school isn't like criminally oriented enough for you. I don't know. I would just have to learn a little bit more, because if I hated law school, if that was my story, then that wouldn't be a good indication for me to quit, because look at me now, like I'm not even doing anything that's related to law school for real, like at least not in the same way. But I have to go, someone's waiting on the room. But thank y'all so much for watching, and if you like this video, please like, comment, subscribe, and share, and I will see y'all next time. Bye.